Hi everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling. It's a concert review episode. Got lots of cool stuff to show you. Get to that in a second. All right, we'll edit that later. Yeah.
How do you, is this, I think I got it, here we go. Okay, we got it, we're here. Kind of a different setup. Welcome back, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I am Will, as you saw from the intro clip. Tim left his camera unattended, and I'm gonna take over this video, I think. First solo video for me. You might have seen me on other episodes in the past. If you haven't, go back, check those out. I do make appearances here and there. As you heard from the intro, probably saw from the title, this is a concert review video. Little bit of a backstory. On September 3rd, me and Mr. Jex Russell, who you also may have seen on previous videos, were supposed to travel up to Bertrand, New Brunswick, to the Oktoberfest festival of some kind to see Mr. Stephen Pearcy. Little change of plans, however, he is not coming. So it's supposed to be his first Canadian date in a decade, a little over a decade. He was supposed to come to the middle of nowhere in New Brunswick to do a show. The Friday night date is Finger 11, and Stephen Pearcy got replaced with Vixen. So I'm not gonna go. Me and Jax decided we're not gonna go, and I kind of spur the moment on September 4th in Bangor. We got Aerosmith coming on their tour with Extreme opening. So I am headed to that on September 4th, which is Sunday. I'll take you guys along for the ride, take over this PVC episode for a special concert review, and capture for you what I can, and give you my little thoughts on the show afterwards. So this is September 2nd. So we got a couple days wait, but I'll catch up with you guys then. It's only been a couple seconds for you guys, but it's been a couple days for me. A different background here. For the first clip, I was actually at my apartment in St. John. I'm now at home, pick up my father. It's about 1:30 the day of the concert. We're leaving here in another half hour, so not sure if we're gonna hit any record stores or see anything, but I'll catch up with you guys on the road. Definitely get some clips at the show and then give my spiel afterwards, but just want to give you an update, and we're headed out of here shortly. Talk to you soon. Just got in the venue, got to my seat. Pretty close. Show starts in less than an hour. Got some clips for you, but they're still doing a little bit of sound check, a little bit of growing pains, I think, for the new renovations here at Main Savings Amphitheater. So see you guys after the show. Hello again, everybody. I don't have as much of an act for this as Tim does, so I'm not sure how the lighting is, the angles. But as you can see, I'm back home. Got back about 2:30 in the morning from Bangor after the concert, so I didn't really want to record this immediately after, trying to let it process a bit. What I'm gonna do, I think, I'm not sure how Tim's gonna edit this, but I'm gonna go through the set list for each band and then give my talk a bit extra after I go through the set list, just to kind of separate it a little bit. So Extreme started. Everything, doors are supposed to open at 5. I don't know if they had sound problems, if they had just equipment problems in general, as it being the first show for Aerosmith in over 2.5 years, the first show of the tour, everyone trying to get organized. So everything was pushed back a half hour. Doors opened at 5:30. Extreme started at 7, and Aerosmith started at 8:30. So Extreme came out. They played Decadence Dance as the opener, and immediately I knew they were going to be exactly what I expected. Gary Sharon sounded perfect. Nuno was amazing. The band sounded good and tight. Then they went into Lil Jack Horny, It's a Monster, and then went over to Extreme 3 and played Am I Ever Gonna Change, which was really, really good to hear. You could tell that since they were opening for Aerosmith, knowing people were there for Aerosmith, that they stuck to Porno Graffiti over their other albums. Whereas I've seen recent set lists of them when they're doing their like individual, like their solo shows, they play a bit more broad stuff, more stuff from a couple more songs from the first album. But as an opening double bill for Aerosmith, it was it was pretty much what I expected. Then they went into Play With Me, which was the song I wanted to hear most from them, so I'm glad they threw it in. That was the only song off of their first album. Then they got the stools out, sat down. Nuno and Gary had a bit of a banter. Then they played the intro of Stairway to Heaven. And they were probably the most humorous band I've seen. After they played the intro of the Stairway to Heaven, Nuno said, "Man, I wish we wrote that. That's a good one." The crowd kind of laughed because at least the crowd knew that song. And then they went in the Wholehearted. Then Nuno went in, said they got to pay some bills. Aerosmith is paying them per note, so he's really gonna mess them up with this one, and played Midnight Express, which sounded amazing. Then they went into More Than Words, which is obviously the crowd was really into that one. Actually, they were almost kind of more into Wholehearted than they were More Than Words, but everyone was singing. If Tim adds that clip, you can just hear me singing through the whole thing. Like, got the crowd into it a little bit. Then they went into Cupid's Dead, which was good. And then Nuno did Flight of the Wounded Bumblebee, which was unbelievable, as Nuno is. And then they ended with Get the Funk Out. So they played, I think it was like 53 minutes or 57 minutes. I wish they would have thrown in another song, since they did have 3 more minutes. Whether it was, well, I would have preferred like Kid Ego or Wind Me Up, something off the first album, because that's my favorite Extreme album, so I'm biased there. But in terms of the opening act set list, they sounded phenomenal. The crowd was not into it. I think I was the only one who stood through the entire set. A couple people in the front were into it, but you could tell everyone was there for for Aerosmith, sorry. Which kind of makes sense looking at the people around me and talking to them. You look at when Aerosmith came out in the early 70s and Extreme didn't come out until 89. So you're looking at like a 15-year difference. For some of these people, Extreme was just too young for them, which sounds weird to say, but you could tell the crowd was definitely there for Aerosmith, which was unfortunate, but I enjoyed Extreme opening. Now we'll now we'll get into the Aerosmith set, and I'll preface with, I didn't know what to expect. I know Steven Tyler was just in rehab 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago maybe. I didn't know if he was ready to perform. I didn't even know if, for a while before I bought my ticket, if the show was even going to happen, realistically, because I know they're not in the best shape. And Steven Tyler was announced he was in rehab. Some other dates were moved and canceled. So I wasn't really sure what to expect. Then, of course, I was supposed to go see Stephen Pearcy on Saturday. That got canceled. And then I started looking at Aerosmith tickets, and I only bought my ticket less than a week ago. So actually, by the time, when I'm shooting this the day after, I bought my ticket a week ago tomorrow. So I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. I know the ticket prices were a bit high, like really high. Not for the resale as much, at least for mine, but like the actual tickets themselves were high. So I wasn't quite sure what was happening exactly. So Aerosmith come on. They were on time, first of all, which was a bonus, because you never know. And they opened with Back in the Saddle, and as soon as Steven Tyler came out with his hat on and his glasses on and his scarf on and his long shirt on, and he hit the first note, it sounded spot on. Like, at that point, I knew it was going to be a good show. I couldn't get over how good he sounded just right off the start. My dad was with me, but we weren't sitting beside each other. He was another section back, and he texted me and said, "Wow, I can't believe how good they sound." So they played Back in the Saddle, which off one of the best Aerosmith albums, which I knew we probably weren't going to hear Rats in the Cellar, which is fine. Then they went in the Same Old Song and Dance, and then Ragdoll, and then Mama Kin. So they're just 4 straightforward rock, get the crowd into it songs. I'm really glad they decided to play Mama Kin, because that's another one of my favorite Aerosmith songs that's realistic to play. So I'm glad they played that. His vocals on Ragdoll were, the ending kind of fell off, but through the song, like, he was hitting the key high notes and the screeches and screams perfect. And if they weren't so iconic, he kind of let them fumble. But I mean, what do you expect? This guy's in his mid-70s. I've been doing this for 50 years. So gotta expect a little bit of a change in the vocals, but for them, like, he was unreal. Then they went into something off Night in the Ruts, which I wasn't expecting. They played Remember, Walking in the Sand. Joe did his little, this is what I remember listening when I was walking over to your house talking to Steven Tyler. Did a little banter thing and then went into the song, which was really good. Then Joe took over the vocals and they did Stop Messing Around. He did the vocals, but it was less so the singing and more so, I think, give Steven a break. He was on the harmonica, sat down by the drums. It was just a band jam, had a good time, solos, and everyone had their own little part to shine, which was nice. Then they went into Hangman Jury. This is where stuff got a little bit, they were having sound issues still. So for Hangman Jury, you couldn't really hear Joe Perry's guitar. They tried to get it turned up. They were really professional about continuing the song without it, but there were other parts of the show that Steven Tyler was trying to get his mic turned up. He couldn't hear himself. The bass come unplugged on one song. Just Joe Perry had a lot of sound problems where he'd start quiet and then they'd turn him up. So I don't know if that's just kinks they got to get worked out since it's the first show. But it didn't really take away from the songs too much. I don't even know if people noticed. I did, because I was watching guys run out on the stage trying to plug stuff in. And then when they plugged it in, you could hear a new instrument. So, but I don't want to hold that against them because they're really professional about getting through the songs. They were good at continuing. You couldn't even really tell if you weren't paying that much attention. Then they went into Seasons of Wither, which was amazing. And then a couple songs, I knew they were going to play ballads because it's Aerosmith, but I didn't really know what they were going to pick. I have ballads I prefer and ballads I really don't prefer. But they went into Living on the Edge. Then they played Full Circle, which I guess they haven't played since 2013, from what I read anyway. And then they played Crying. Full Circle is at least something different. It's not like Amazing or one of those other, the late 90s ballads. So it was cool that they picked something at least a little bit more obscure. And then Crying, I liked that ballad more than others. And that's one of the first Aerosmith songs I remember listening to when before I got into music. I remember Crying in the video. They played the video on the big screen, so it was a little bit of I had some memories from when I liked music and liked these old songs before I got into actually music on my own. Then they played The Other Side, and then I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, which I could have done without. I would have replaced it with like What It Takes, obviously, but they're gonna play I Don't Want to Miss a Thing. That's kind of, that's coming with an Aerosmith song. Then they went into Love in an Elevator, Sweet Emotion, Dude Looks Like a Lady to finish off the show, which I knew was coming at the end because guess you had some ballads, and then I knew you were gonna close it out strong with really catchy. Steven Tyler nailed the vocals. Sweet Emotion, they had a little bass solo at the start, which was nice. Just amazing way to end the show with those songs. And again, the band sounded like really, really tight together. The saxophone player was killing it. It was just really, really tight band. You could tell the chemistry was there still. So then they went off stage saying they finished the show, but everyone knows that's not true. They pull the piano out, they come back on stage, and they go into Dream On. And if you've listened to Dream On, if you're watching this video, you probably have. The vocals on that are tough. I've tried to sing in my car, not good. So I didn't know if mid-70s Steven Tyler, at the end of 15 songs, or 16 songs, was going to make it. And he crushed it. The piano sounded good. The band sounded clean. He killed the vocals. He hit the screeches. It was amazing. Then they ended off with Walk This Way, which is another one you know is coming. But then probably one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me at a concert happened. They did their bows. They said their goodbyes. They waved. The techs took the bass and the guitars, and the drummer left, and the show ended. But then Steven Tyler and Joe Perry kind of lingered on stage, and like you could tell they were having a conversation. People were starting to like leave a little bit. Everyone else left the stage except Steven and Joe. And then Steven gets on the mic and he's like, hey, it's been 2.5 years since we've done a show. I think we're going to do another one. So we waited probably 5 minutes. He was making fun of other people. Oh, you guys are on the bus already. Trying to get everyone wrangled back on the stage to do another song. So I genuinely believe that the show was supposed to end after Walk This Way. It was such a cool interaction to see between the band trying to just come together for another song. And then they did Big 10-inch Record, which was unbelievable to end the show. It was nice to see an encore that wasn't the biggest hit. And right before they played, Steven Tyler's like, okay, now we're going to do a song we know you don't know. So they were aware it wasn't their biggest hit. But I loved it. I love Toys in the Attic. So that was a great ending for me. They played 2 hours and sounded amazing the whole time. Other than a couple technical issues, but it is what it is. I guess outside of that, I'll say what I wanted to hear from them. I would have liked to hear Train Kept a Rollin'. Just Get Your Wings is my favorite Aerosmith album, but the jamming parts of that song, I really would have liked to see live. But it is what it is. I wasn't like sad I didn't see it, but if I could have added another one, it would have been that. And then Rats in the Celly would have been cool, but I knew when they opened with Back in the Saddle, that probably wasn't going to happen, which again, fine. I have no complaints. The show was amazing. You could tell Joe really likes the center of the stage. Anytime he had a chance, he'd go stand in the front of everybody. The band sounded tight. The chemistry was good. Yeah, just a really good show overall. I'm sad I didn't get to see Piercy, but I'm glad it worked out to go see Aerosmith in Extreme. Had I known they were going to sound like that, I probably would have bought tickets long ago and drove from Bertrand, New Brunswick, 9 hours to Bangor to see both. So it worked out in the end. I guess I'll wrap this up. I don't have any idea how long concert reviews are supposed to be. I've just been winging it for this whole video. So that could be 10 minutes. It could be, well, this ramble was 12 minutes. So it could be 12 minutes. It could be 20 minutes. I don't know. Hope you guys enjoyed the solo video for me. I hope you guys don't roast me too hard in the comments for being new and awkward and whatever. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. And I'll probably see you in a video very shortly. And now likely cut in Tim right here. See you later.
Oh, I didn't turn that off. Silly me. And we have a very, very special guest for Tim's Final Confessions. This man, a lot of you watching this will know exactly who this man is. I'm going to give him an introduction. He doesn't need much of one. You know him as the face of the KISSFAQ, author of several fantastic books, including this excellent Odyssey, along with Tim McFate, deep dive into the Music from the Elder album, which I happen to be one of those crazy people that actually like it. And for me, I deeply appreciate the fact that he contributed an excellent chapter to my book, Unspooled. Mr. KISSFAQ himself, Julian Gill. And, you know, since he's such a Kiss expert, of course, we're going to talk about Aerosmith. Uh, Julian, thank you so much for uh, you know taking the time out to talk to me about this excellent book that you have out now, and thanks for coming on to the show.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Tim, for inviting me back on. It was great to have you on my show to talk about your book and also to be invited to write a bit for it. And thanks also for calling out Tim and my Odyssey. You know, that's a real labor of love, a deep work. You know, Tim's the primary responsibility for that whole concept, the execution and everything. I packaged it up at the end and basically tried to blow it up in essence. But, you know, Tim's work there on that and the solo album book, you know, those are going to stand for the future as interviews with the participants involved. And it's so nice to break away from the KISS realm and do an Aerosmith book. And that's when I do miss a collaborator and have to do it all myself. So it's a whole different world, but it's also very connected to KISS.
Yeah, I mean, the trajectories of Aerosmith and KISS cross paths at many times during their career, whether it's being on the same touring circuit, being on the same bills, same producers, same co-songwriters. Yeah, there's all kinds of parallels. So KISS fans will find much to like. And the book that we're talking about is called Aerosmith on Tour, 1973 to 1985. You can get it on Amazon. I'll post a link to it.
Yeah,
and
can't even. I use these stupid backgrounds, but it's a absolute massive tome.
And I like your live bootleg background too. If anybody's wondering what that is, it's live bootleg. It's meant to look like it has coffee stains on it or whatever. But yeah, so yeah, you've done so many different KISS books, and yeah, the Odyssey one was great because, you know, The Elder is such a polarizing album for KISS fans, and I enjoyed the very, very deep dive into all things Elder, the people that you track down to talk to on every aspect, all on the periphery of the album. And you know, it's the trouble is when you like these big bands, these are the types of books that the fans crave, but the actual bands will probably never do, or they would never do it to this extent, because there might be things in it that they don't like, but that actually happened. So, Julian, where did you get the idea to do this book? You know, I'm assuming that you're a longtime Aerosmith fan, as a lot of us are on here. And also, why did you choose to end it in 1985?
Well, I mean, primarily, I have the same entry point into Aerosmith as I do KISS, and it dates back to 1985. Probably a little bit before that, because their reunion back in the Saddle Tour had kicked off, and it was all the talk at school. So it was impossible not to escape, you know, all my friends who had guitars, you know, suddenly picking up their older brother's guitars in many cases and trying to play the Walk This Way riff. But going back to, you know, when I was starting out on the web and researching tour dates and trying KISS tour dates, started running into a lot of the same data for Aerosmith. So I just started squirreling it away. I was equally interested in that band from that perspective, as much as I like both bands' original 70s eras, but I could only focus on one thing at a time. So eventually we fast forward many years, and I finally decided to commit to it. I think the driving factor was the 50th anniversary coming up. It was time to do it. None of the Aerosmith books that I wanted to read had come along in the gap. I wanted a book that was like Kiss Alive Forever, but for Aerosmith. So I decided to do it. And once I started getting into it, then it quickly became clear that I could not do it in that sort of page count. I had to split it into eras, and Aerosmith has the perfect splitting point for that in the separation between the Columbia and Geffen eras. There's no more perfect time to end, you know, volume one than with 1985 and the end of the Back in the Saddle tour, because you don't know what's going to happen next. Well, we do, but you know what I mean. It's the perfect segue into a volume two and separates what are two completely different bands in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a nice, clean and neat. I mean, even though you do have 85 ends with Done with Mirrors, their first Geffen album, but it wasn't, their comeback hadn't happened yet. It even predates Run DMC. So if you went into 86, you'd be getting into that situation. And it's funny because 86 is when I first became aware of Aerosmith. I saw the video for Let the Music Do the Talking. And then later that year, I, of course, heard Run DMC covering Walk This Way. Didn't know it was a cover. Didn't know anything about Steven Tyler or Joe Perry. And that set the scene, of course. And being a full on patient one, perfect age, 12 years old when an album called Slippery When Wet came out and was all that I listened to for pretty much a year. Here Comes Permanent Vacation and Pump. And that's when Aerosmith really came onto my radar. So not only did I get those albums, but I went back and bought them all. So I'm a huge fan of the 70s Aerosmith stuff. Comparing this, the work that you did on this book to Kiss Alive Forever, did you find it easier with the advent of internet all the time? Because I'm assuming that some of your early research for Kiss Alive Forever either predated the internet or it was very early days of dial-up.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a crossover between the two in that microfilm and going to libraries and calling in microfilm, which to browse, you would see the arrow wings often flash by, and that made it easy from that perspective. The advent of so many online resources have made it easier. Number one, for quick research to actually find the stuff and then be able to call in the film. And know exactly which page to go to, so you're not going through 10 miles of reel film and fiche in order to find what you're looking for and get a screen grab of it. So the internet age has made it a lot easier without any doubt, but also having the blueprints of kind of how to approach these works from Kiss Alive Forever gave me a kind of guidebook of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to talk to members of the crew. I wanted to talk to people who were involved in critical areas of the band's history. I knew I didn't want to talk to the band because I wanted to keep it an unofficial project, but I also knew I didn't want to focus on the dirt because they've written all their own books. So I had some good guides from doing my own Kiss on Tour work, which I've kept very different to Kiss Alive Forever, complementary, not competitive. The two go hand in hand with different perspectives. I wanted to marry all of that together into one book because no one else is doing, I thought no one else is doing this.
Yes.
Yes. It turned out that someone was, and someone in the same city. And that's probably one of the most hilarious coincidences ever.
Yeah, you couldn't count on something like that, but yeah. Well, when you get a big band like Aerosmith, sooner or later, someone's going to come around. There's going to be someone that's a big fan that's going to come around and say, there's a lot of Aerosmith books. They themselves have done them. 3 out of the 5 original members have written books, but there's still a gap. And when you see a gap, you fill that gap. And yeah, information. It's like the tour dates I find fascinating. And the rise from an opening act to a headliner, and then the inevitable crash in the early 80s where they were, playing to smaller and smaller audiences before the Back in the Saddle tour. As a longtime fan, in doing the research for this book, what did you learn, or what knowledge as a fan was enhanced by your research for this?
I think just it comes down to a respect for the band. We hear phrases like the grind, and I now use that incessantly because it really represents to me what these bands go through on the road and the grind of being on the road, and reading about their experiences with being home and reaching for the phone for room service. You get a much more respect for them as humans who actually live in a twisted world, and there's no surprise why some of them go in certain directions and others, leave bands, because you really start to understand what a grueling process it is when you're part of an assembly line as well. So you're not only on the road, then you have to come off the road and you're expected to create on demand because you've not been able to, write while on the road because you're living in a weird bubble. So I think you learn much more about the humanity of touring or inhumanity of touring, and also a lot about the music business. I was very fortunate to be able to interview David Krebs, who was one of their original managers, and to learn about that side of the business. Of course, Lieber Krebs, signed Elephant's Memory. John Lennon's backing group were their first signing. They signed Aerosmith. They signed the New York Dolls. I mean, Dolls, Aerosmith are a pretty big deal. And then, of course, they represented Def Leppard, Ted Nugent, a plethora of artists throughout the 70s. So to get to hear from him how that business was structured and how it related from his perspective on that side to dealing with the artists, colored my interpretation of what I was getting out of interviews with other people, road crew, people in the industry, and really helped shape a story that I felt was much more honest in some ways, because we were able to understand the music side, the business side, a bit with a bit more clarity. You know, obviously things went bad between band and original management. But there has to be a great deal of respect for what was accomplished. And, you know, respect to David for, you know, not even giving me a minute to, you know, talk about some of his experiences, but also for not trying to change anything. You know, any quotes that I had in there from the 70s of Joe or Steven or other band members saying negative things about Libra Krebs, didn't try to have me change. Let that all stay, because it is different perspectives about the same events. And that's an important part that I try and put into there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was a big part of the narrative in the band transitioning from not only, you know, pre-comeback, but getting clean again and switching to Tim Collins management. Of course, they're not gonna have much good to say about previous management. Most artists don't, if there's been a split of that sort. But the fact is, yeah, they kept him on the road. And people also have to understand that even though Aerosmith now is this worldwide recognized brand of a band who, you know, the mention of the name conjures up several songs all at once in a listener's mind. They were not top 40 darlings in the 70s. They had to fight hard because, you know, when Dream On first came out, I think it peaked at all of number 59. It wasn't until 76 that it became the top 10 hit. And the reason most people know it today, Walk This Way took 2 years to hit the top 10. And then they had a few other songs like Last Child and Come Together that, you know, that hit the top 40. But this was not a band that was having top 10 singles left, right, and center. And so, yeah, the grind. They had to get out there on the road and not worry about selling singles and get people to buy the albums. And they did. But if they didn't tour as much and the, you know, the stuff that you're covering, they wouldn't have had all those gold and platinum albums. And I'm sure there were times that they were out on tour when the last thing they wanted to do was be out there on tour, and they playing all the big festivals and being in, you know, various states of you know, non-awareness that they were. It's pretty amazing that those 5 guys are still kicking to this very day. And like you said, you didn't want to dwell on the dirt. I think it's important to concentrate on the work that they did, and they just hammered the road. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they must have had one of the most intense touring schedules of any 70s band.
They did have a tough touring schedule, but you know what was interesting about that with Kiss, it was easy. We had all the itineraries. Validating them was a bit more of a challenge, and there are still a few gaps. I didn't have any of that when it came to doing the Aerosmith one, so I had to start from scratch and reverse engineer the itineraries and then try and fill in the gaps. So, you know, determining what their touring history was, you know, it's hard to judge. Is it grueling or is it not, unless you're living it? And that also goes into the side of the dirt. You know, I didn't want to deal with that in, you know, what's in Walk This Way and the autobiographies, but I did want to validate certain things in there. I've always been fascinated by bands who write these books, whether it's Motley Crue, The Dirt, Kiss Behind the Makeup, and Nothing to Lose. You know, you're given dates and places and things. You want to see, can you figure that out? So I even went to the first guy who rejected them for a record deal. I wanted to get that story firsthand. So got the band, the guy who turned down Aerosmith in 71, I think, or 72, first, and got rid of him. Day before I went to press, David called me up and said, "Hey, I found it." You found what? Found the original Aerosmith contract. And to have the exact date that he signed, or Aerosmith signed with Libra Krebs, and obviously the deal, to be completely different than the actual date people celebrate as that anniversary, again, is very cool. So
Yeah.
a different approach to figuring out life on the road. Road crew chief, Kelly Kelleher, absolutely. That guy has to do a book, because he didn't just work with Aerosmith. He worked the New England scene. He worked with a lot of artists during his career. And boy, did he have a lot of stories that ended up in the book.
Oh yeah, those are the guys, like, the heavy lifters, as it were. And the guys have to be on the road and perform, but the guys that set it up and tear it down, the guys that deal with the promoters, deal with the venues, make sure that they get paid. Yeah. And Aerosmith, like most bands, had a pretty steady road crew throughout most of the 70s. Did you talk to anybody else that had been on their road crew?
Hi, Bob. If you want to talk to someone about a band, talk to their sound man, and he is incredible. He also needs to have a book, because absolutely stunning. To understand how he handled two different guitar players and the importance of sound, and also Steven's attention to detail when it came to sound. Steven cared about how that band sounded, and you get the stories from the people who were there. And that's, again, something I wanted to replicate from Kiss Alive Forever, is to get those stories. So I talked to publicists, I talked to producers, I talked to people associated with the band, opening acts. I wanted to know how they were treated, their stories. Tommy Thayer from Kiss was in Black and Blue on the Back in the Saddle tour and did 2 stints. They took a break in between the two, and Aerosmith basically came back much more functional for the second part of the tour. And that's where they introduced Let the Music Do the Talking with Joe's original arrangement into the set. So get the stories from some of those people. There are dozens more of people who I would have loved to have spoken with, but just wasn't able to connect with for one reason or another. But I think the people who I did are really the core of the people who need to be spoken with.
A fascinating period for them, and it actually kind of lines up with a fascinating period for Kiss, is the early 80s. And I can understand you didn't want it to be an official project, so you didn't want to talk to any of the band members. But did you ever think about trying to talk to Jimmy Crespo or Rick Dufay, trying to track those guys down?
I tried to get to Jimmy, wasn't able. So Rick, I would have loved to talk to Rick in particular. No disrespect to Jimmy, but I wasn't able to. So I compensated by licensing a rude amount of pictures from the Rock and a Hard Place tour, photos to include in the work, and I did get one photo, the rights to use it in the book, from Trouser Press, which is just a legendary photo of Jimmy Crespo leaning against the wall of the warehouse, where there's graffiti sprayed on it saying "Come back, Joe," with "Good luck, Jimmy." It's just an alternative shot of that. So I made sure I represented those guys in the book. I even counted the number of photos of each band member that I had licensed for inclusion in there, to try and maintain some balance, so that Tom, Brad, and Joey weren't forgotten either, which far too often happens. And also, keeping with the balances, I included the Joe Perry Project touring history as much as I could, and Whitford St. Holmes. So that was important. It helped that Mark Bell, Cowboy Mark Bell, who was the project's final singer, has published his road diary from his tenure in the band, which went from 82 to 84, and the reformation of Aerosmith. So that's also a great read for people who may be interested in more of the band's side history.
Yeah, that stuff is interesting too. The Joe Perry Project albums. I mean, I think that first album, Let the Music Do the Talking, if you stuck Tyler on vocals there, would have made a perfectly good Aerosmith album. At least some of the songs would. The second album was pretty good too. They had Charlie Farron on vocals. That third album I do like, but it's kind of an oddball. But yeah, it's great that, because people forget those periods. It's like when someone talks about Motley Crue and they don't talk about John Corabi or Randy Castillo, and they gloss over it. Or like with Kiss themselves, when they put the makeup back on in '96, there was a period of time where it's like they didn't even want to admit that there was a band without makeup and without Ace and Peter. It seemed that way anyway. They eventually loosened the reins on that a little bit, but I like knowing about all about the band's careers. And for both of those bands, the early 80s was, I'm sure, a trying time for them, but also a fascinating time. And I love Night in the Ruts. I've argued Night in the Ruts is my favorite Aerosmith album. I did an episode of The Contrarians on it. And I love Rock and Hard Place too. Those hard scrabble albums, the ones that struggled to even go gold and eventually platinum, I think. But as far as who would you have liked to have talked to that you think might have actually made the book, elevated the book, like, because the people you talked to gave you what you wanted, but who would you have liked to have talked to?
I would have liked to have talked to more of the crew from the 79 to 82 era, just to get a bit more of a perspective from how bad things were from their vantage point. Again, it's trying to balance not including too much of that side of things with understanding just the impact of how much of a struggle it was for the band, especially as those attendances and venues start shrinking quite rapidly. I mean, they go from opening up in arenas, playing arenas on the Rock and a Hard Place tour to basically ending in clubs in 84. And that's a rapid decline. I mean, playing with bands like Dio, through that era, Anvil.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure Anvil opened for them during that period.
Yeah. So, it would be great to get some of that perspective. I would have loved to have had Bobby Rondinelli, who filled in for Joey, for dates in late 83, early 84, when Joey was ill, to get his kind of take on that.
I did not know that. Of course, he was in Rainbow and.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. No, he wasn't in Rainbow then because Chuck Berge was, but yeah, that's right. But I didn't know that he filled in. It doesn't surprise me that Joey was ill, but.
Yeah. So, that's one person, that's one player who I would have loved to have spoken with. But again, I was able to get opening acts from that era to get some input. Try to get Ted Nugent. That would have been cool just because he did so many dates with Aerosmith and Kiss.
Yeah.
And he was Detroit. So to get that Midwestern perspective for the areas where all three, I mean, his band in the mid to late 70s was a monster, just an absolute machine, especially with Derek. So
there you go. There's a connection too. Derek St. Holmes.
Exactly. Tried to get him. I would like to talk to him a bit about St. Paradise and, some of the other stuff that he did after leaving. And also obviously the Whitford St. Holmes stuff. But you know what? I get enough of the people in there. I think I've got Mock in there. I've got Bruce Botnick to talk about Once a Rocker. And he, of course, worked on the Cal Jam 2 recording as well. So I had never noticed that credit. So, I think there's more than enough in terms of the interview vignettes married with quotes that are contemporaneous. That's important to me, especially from the band members. It's much better to get a contemporary quote of theirs talking about what's going on rather than a revisionist one,
right?
From decades later. It's simply they were busy living the life. So it's better to get what they put on the record back in the day rather than, after having years to think about something, or in most cases having forgotten it because they were
or they start to just remember what they've read supposedly that they said.
It becomes a circle.
After a while, I honestly don't think that they remember, but they'll convince you that something happened, and then you talk to someone else, and that's not how I remember that at all. But it usually, like you said, it contradicts the statements that they would have made at the time. You mentioned about talking to bands that toured with Aerosmith. Now, they are a band that don't always have the best of reputations as far as how they treated their opening acts. Rush never had much good to say about the way, as opposed to Kiss, who they said, treated them great. Kansas has said that, Steven Tyler in particular tried to sabotage one of their shows in Topeka. And did you get a sense from, talking to, Kelly from the road crew and anyone else, like, what is your sense about how they viewed bands that they toured with?
It really depended. There is friction in there. I've got the Rush Aerosmith drama there and the stuff that the guys in Rush said and Joe's later apology. He didn't recall it, But I made sure to include that because I did want to get Rush, their perspective in there again, because of the importance of them as a band, their stature, and also the cross-pollination between them and touring with Aerosmith and Kiss. That was important. I had some accounts in there of friction between Aerosmith and other acts, some stories of plugs being pulled, but I think the best stuff in terms of interband friction are the 2 dates that Kiss opened for Aerosmith in '74. Those are the ones where punches are thrown, knives are pulled, and it's a carryover between one show and a second show a month later, less than a month, actually, a few weeks. One show in, I think, Maryland, and then the second one in Detroit. So that one we've always heard a lot from the Kiss perspective. But to be able to ask the Aerosmith crew their perspective on it, all of a sudden you're finding out about Kiss's road manager, Sean Delaney, basically throwing a punch, and slapping an Aerosmith guy, and they're the opening band. So you now get another viewpoint of a perspective, and you find out that Aerosmith didn't like the idea of Peter's drums levitating as an opening act, and telling him basically just to set the drums up on the floor, and Kiss being aghast at that because they're Kiss. These are 2 bands, and that are like hockey teams. They're gonna take off the gloves and fight for their team,
their turf,
as much as they're going to compete on the stage musically. They don't want to give an inch, but they want to take an inch. So it was a fascinating kind of illumination on those events to get that Aerosmith side defined, and that's one of the shining things. And some of the stories that come out of that, you then find out that Tom Hamilton had Ace Frehley thrown out of his hotel room in '73 after seeing a Dolls performance at Max's. Ace shows up for a party knowing someone who knew the band and passes out on Tom's bed. So he has to call his crew chief to throw Ace out. And, that he's talking to Ace at the time, who says that he's in this weird band. I think that's really cool, just to get...
It sounds very Ace.
Oh, it does. It's a weird band. I can't do the accent properly. And then the Cheap Trick's in there. A great quote from Tom Peterson about seeing Aerosmith and T-Rex.
Wow.
In Philly. There's another Cheap Trick quote. I think it's Rick hanging out with Steven on top of the roof of Des Moines Hotel after a show, watching a tornado. And Rick saying, I could tell with Steven watching that tornado that a tornado of another sort was approaching too. So, you get all these additional little bits of salt and pepper to sprinkle seasoning throughout the book, but also on the history. Because going back to the Kiss thing in Detroit, a guy had been following the bands around on tour, and he was looking for work. And he goes up to the Aerosmith crew chief and says, hey, do you got any jobs? I'd love to work, on the crew and, get in that side of the industry. Like, no, we don't have anyone. Why don't you go and ask, Kiss's crew? So he goes over, ends up as with Kiss for the rest of the '70s from looking for a job with Aerosmith.
Who would that have been?
God, and now you're going to ask me who, and I can't. The name. That's why I do books. I gotta write this stuff down.
Oh, that
because
guy.
I can't remember all this stuff off the top of my head.
Because as big fans, usually you hear a name like when you said Kelly Kelleher. I said, yeah, I know that name, and I know Night Bob. I know who you mean, but those guys are legends in the industry. So the book ends. The Back in the Saddle tour. Does that mean that you plan on doing another volume that picks up Done with Mirrors and forward?
Well, yeah, and that's the funny part, because if I hold them up together and hopefully they both show up,
those are big books.
Yeah, volume 2 exists.
Oh,
it's got a let's see. I'd like to show this properly.
Okay.
It's got an updated version of the artwork that appears on the first one, with obviously a much more permanent vacation. But it's basically written, other than the narrative sections and maybe some interviews. And even today it's at 650 pages, so it's already having chapters chopped off the end of it. This one currently goes through 2007. I've already chopped that, and it's already pruned back to 2006 because it's just growing too much as I add more data. There's a lot more information for that era available. I have all the itineraries for the tours. It's just a matter of validating them, finding
And like
all the
you said,
touring
plus,
data
I mean,
and the
once you get
sets.
to the 2000s, they're touring much more than they're recording. So there's a lot more tour dates to cover.
There is, and there's with Aerosmith, there's a lot of different set lists. They are not like some bands going out there playing the same basic stuff every night. There's a lot of gems coming back into the set, just like with most of the legacy acts. They start doing a lot more variety, trying to mix up the two eras of the band. That is something that I think that they did a lot more successfully than Kiss. They were able to marry the MTV era with the PCP era
Yeah.
much more effectively, and actually have a unity in sound, so that you could play a song like Hangman Jury and Big 10-inch very easily in the same set. You can play Draw the Line and Permanent Vacation in the same set. I just wish they'd do more from Done with Mirrors.
Yeah, I like that album a lot. Do you think that's because not only, I mean, with Kiss, you had makeup, non-makeup, but you also had a lot of personnel changes, and Aerosmith had personnel changes too, but that was almost like a brief blip on the radar, as opposed to Kiss, where it was this protracted period, and then the original band never really did do much again post, I think, with 96. Psycho Circus was supposed to be, but we all know that turned out. Do you think that had a lot to do with it, why there was this a real divide? It was almost like, even though you had Paul and Gene as a constants throughout, but it was almost like Van Halen, where they didn't sound right together.
I think the changes to Aerosmith sound throughout the MTV era were much more subtle, whereas Kiss did dynamic changes wholesale throughout the 1980s after the Originals era, because obviously you go from Unmasked, which is pop pap, into The Elder, which is, concept, into Creatures of the Night, which is bombastic heavy metal in an AC/DC-ish vein, into Lick It Up, which is now more into UFO, more melodic hard rock, and then Animalize continues along those lines. They're chasing trends and changing willy-nilly. So you've got speed rock with Give Me More and stuff like that. No, no, no on Crazy Nights. And then they're chasing Bon Jovi. So Aerosmith stayed much more true in essence to its roots, while making a gradual evolution and bringing in those external songsmiths to help finesse the material. But there was still enough of, Stephen and Joe collaborations. Tom's, contributions stayed strong. Brad was still coming in with ideas. So you still have the same 5 ingredients slowly maturing, whereas Gene and Paul were desperately trying to catch up, I think, with themselves. So in essence, Kiss is 8 different bands. How many lineups they had? I think 11. So, they're really a bit schizophrenic. And it's not surprising that some members of the band who didn't stay long, the Vinnie Vincents and the Mark St. Johns, that material aged out of the set very rapidly, and very little came back in, other than, say, a Paul Stanley song, Heaven's on Fire, or Tears Are Falling. The other guys, they're not going to pull No, No, No out any day. It's going to be a Paul or Gene song in most cases that did make it back into the set.
Yeah, you're right. Aerosmith did, a lot of people, I mean, I got on board with the Permanent Vacation pump era, went back. But it isn't all that different. Once you take some of the Bruce Fairbairn production away, you're hearing, like a song like Monkey on Your Back. You could almost hear a song like that on Rocks with, like the Jack Douglas production. So Julian, Aerosmith on Tour, 1973, 1985. Fascinating look at a fascinating band of personalities that, against all odds, are still out there, and they're still touring.
They finally played their 50th anniversary show last night at Fenway. I mean,
Yeah.
they finally did it. Joey's not there, unfortunately. We got John Douglas filling in for him. He wasn't available for these dates or the residency that was canceled. But that's going to kick off on the 14th. Still out there. And they looked and sounded pretty darn good to me.
Yeah. Amazing. And I'll be honest, I've never seen Aerosmith. I've never seen Aerosmith live, but I've always, I've been a fan. Once I became a fan, I stayed a fan, and I still like telling people, said, look, if you got into Aerosmith, when you heard "Dude Looks Like a Lady," but you never went back, do yourself a favor, if nothing else, buy that old 1980 greatest hits. You'll at least know "Dream On" and "Walk This Way," and maybe you'll even get into the rest of it, because I still think that's a good entry point for the earlier stuff. So other than, the follow-up to this book, what else have you got on the go, Julian?
Working on a possible publication called Mass Hysteria that's going to focus on the period between December 1979 and July 1981. So the unmasked era of KISS, losing
You
Peter.
have my attention.
Yeah. Losing Peter, integrating Eric Carr, signing the demise of Casablanca Records, and the ingestion into the phonogram polygram monster, and everything that goes with that. It's Mass Hysteria. Should give you some indication of a kind of perspective that I'm approaching it from, that especially on the Australian end of that tour, where Hysteria was,
Shandy top 10 single, and
but it was just a brief moment in time that captured perfectly a very small recreation of what the Beatles had done there, over a decade earlier. So, but it was still entertaining. It was still, some very good shows, and it was still a band working hard. And then we just ended off with the aftermath of that. I cut off where the new recordings in 81 start to become The Elder. I want it to be a segue between Dynasty and Odyssey, which, Tim, again, went into so much detail with some of the people who he was able to track down on that one, from the door to the engineers to all that. I want this to be separate to that, but also I don't think that we told, and this is my part of the Odyssey that I was responsible for, the introduction to that era. So much more information is now available 5-6 years after the original book came out, that I want to, take a second bite at rewriting the genesis of The Elder and the impact of Unmasked and 1980 on causing The Elder. To explain that, I think, how I more clearly interpret it.
Wow, that sounds like it'll be like, in Star Wars terms, this book you're working on will be Rogue One to Odyssey's A New Hope. It'll lead right into it.
Oh, absolutely. Darth Vader's coming through the door in July 1981, literally.
Yeah, right on. All right. Well, Julian, thank you very, very much for coming on and talking about the book. I'll post a link to it below. If you're an Aerosmith fan, this is a must read. It'll look perfectly good on your shelf, and you'll be taking out a lot to read. Aerosmith on Tour 1973 to 1985. You can find Julian at KISSFAQ. Where else can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. Just search my name, Julian Gill, or AerosmithOnTour.com, and that'll take you to my Facebook presence, which is where I do most of my updates. And I'm still in process of putting a lot of this stuff online so that it is freely available, in addition to being able to be purchased as a packaged up form.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Julian. And thanks, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions.
Thank you, Tim.